Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Divine Fingerprints podcast. I am Andy Traeger, your host today, and we are joined by Kim Stuart. Welcome, Kim.
Hello, it's so good to be here, Andy. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk to you about writing and coaching and grace and a bunch of wonderful topics. So Kim and I have known each other for most of the last year now. She has been one of my writing coaches along with Bob Goff. And more than anyone else, if you end up reading my book and liking it, you can give Kim a lot of credit for that because she really took my words and ideas and helped me to both organize them and speak to the reader in a way that I was not necessarily sure how to do to begin with. So I'm very appreciative of Kim for that. And I think it's fun to start with a little story. Our first meeting, I came in with my two chapters that I thought were so fun and exciting. And I had lots and lots of hooks in them because I was really bound and determined that I was going to hook the reader. And Kim's feedback on those was that I had 8 or so hooks in there that were great for about 8 different chapters, and I had lots of compelling stories, but that if I didn't actually finish a thought, that the reader might actually throw the book across the room and never get to the fun parts. So it was a really creative and fun way of encouraging me to rewrite chapter 1, which I did.
Wow. So, I didn't know that I was causing an existential crisis. And listen, if the people like your book, it's because you worked really hard. So that's very nice of you to say I had anything to do with it. Evidently, I did tell you not to throw the book across the room. So that's good advice.
Well, I'd much rather the book not be a projectile. So,
I mean, it still might be. Here's the thing. We can't control everyone's responses to our writing, but I don't anticipate any projectile risk with your book. So that's funny that's what we talked about the first time.
I'm encouraged by that. And it made it really, the point I wanted to make was that when the feedback got quite a bit better by about our fourth visit, it made it much more meaningful knowing that it wasn't a rubber stamp. Because you don't want a coach that's a rubber stamp.
I could tell you're a coach. And you're a teacher. And so I knew, blowing smoke. And you know when people are saying things that maybe are only one half true. And I don't think that we do each other a favor with that because you are such a hard worker and you want things to be right. You have a beautiful perfectionism that that is a huge compliment because it means that you have such attention to detail. So I could see even in that first call, if I made up stuff, you wouldn't trust me. But you take a risk, and I know you know that as well with coaching. That some people don't want the truth, so you did, and you ran with it. So good on you.
Yeah, I appreciate all of those kind words from you as well. And I don't know that I've ever been complimented for perfectionism before. Usually, perfectionism, we tend to think of that as not such a
it's a superpower.
Thing.
It's a superpower as long as you choose the lane. Right? So for writing, I always say perfectionism is such an amazing muscle to use, but not in the first, second, or third draft, because that's perfect. I have some perfectionism my own self. And so if I put that to work too quickly, I don't write the book because I'm thinking that wasn't right. That paragraph's not good enough. So later drafts, later on in a project, superpower.
I never really thought about it that way. I always just tend to think of it as a weakness that I need to work on.
No way. No, I want my neurosurgeon to be a perfectionist. Every time I get on a plane, I'm like, I pray everyone in that cockpit is a perfectionist. So it can be totally a superpower. But, if we use it to be unkind to ourselves or to other people, then gotta tell it to pipe down.
Well, and you're absolutely right, because not only have I coached soccer and golf, but I help my students with writing their college essays. And
right.
I pretty much am the same style as you in terms of trying to be kind, but also trying to make sure I'm not helping them if they submit a college essay and I just rubber stamp it and then they don't get into the place and it's not a good essay. So there's a lot of times when it's basically a kind way of saying we really need to rewrite this one.
Right.
And, I try to use we and all of those strategies that I think you used as well. And it does make it a lot easier to trust the positive feedback when it's not just a rubber stamp or a guarantee, for sure.
Totally.
So you, in addition to the coaching, have written a bunch of books, and you wrote all these fiction books. And then your most recent one, Star for Jesus, is a very, very vulnerable book about grace. Tell us a little bit about what inspired that journey for you.
I feel like I've been writing that book with my life for about 2 decades. So you mentioned the title Star for Jesus, and then in parentheses, it's and other jobs I quit. So I've known about the grace of God for a long time. I've agreed and nodded in churches when people talk about grace. When my parents modeled grace for me, I would smile and nod and thank them. And then I'd get real busy trying to prove to God that He needed my help. So the idea of grace, this unmerited, unearned, extraordinary gift that I cannot work for and that's mine forever, goes against the grain of everything else in my life. When I work, I get paid. When I do well, I get a pat on the back. Everywhere else, grace just almost doesn't make sense. So I think it's just taking me a long time, not just to agree with God that He is a God of grace and that He has enough grace for me and enough to cushion every fall. Not just to say, yes, you're right, but to actually let it seep into my bones. So the book came out of the seeping, different stories that have bit by bit kind of encouraged me to risk believing that that's true. So you mentioned that I've written a bunch of novels. I did. I wrote 8. Well, I wrote 9, but one of them's buried under a tree in my backyard, and you'll never see it. But 8 were published. And it was funny writing this nonfiction bit. You mentioned that it was vulnerable, and it really was. In some ways, it was such a relief even to write true stories because nobody can come at me and say, what about the plot line of this one? Or I'm not sure this character is real because no, actually that character is my dad. So I'm positive that he's real. So there was a little bit of comfort in that. And yet there was a different level of, wow, I'm really going to say the truth with nothing to hide behind. There's no way to make this softer or harder or less funny or more funny because really this is how it happened. And so I think I will try nonfiction again, but I know this time better have your wits about you because it does require a different level of vulnerability to tell stories like these.
Absolutely. I think my book is much the same idea. And actually, I didn't necessarily put Divine Fingerprints together with Grace originally, but I think I do now in the sense that divine fingerprints are this beautiful expression of grace.
Absolutely.
And one of the ways that God shows that. And I think you may or may not remember, but my chapter 1 ended up being the second to last chapter that I ended up writing. And that's a lot of what the first point ended up being, was that divine fingerprints are an expression of God's character, not deserved by any of us. He's kind enough to show us the evidence of what He's doing in our lives in the hopes that we will trust Him more. But it's not about us in a lot of ways. It's not about the story I tell, and that is the fun one about running my own finger over with the golf cart. It's like He's still willing to show grace to the guy who does very unique, stupid things, and shows grace in all kinds of different ways. So it's an amazing expression.
You're right. It's funny because grace, on the one hand, it is so, it blankets all of us, right? It's this cloak that blankets all of our lives as a corporate body, but it's also so personal. I think we get it wrong when we think, well, God in general is love. God in general extends grace. I think it's all monogrammed. It's got our names all over it. The expressions are very, very personal. And so that makes it more powerful to me, not less. It means that God is willing to involve Himself in the intricacies of my life and to speak the language that I understand, that my heart understands. It's remarkable to me.
Very true. It is. Sometimes the things that I've seen, it feels like only I would have seen.
Right.
And I think you described some of those as well. I feel like the story in your book that I connected with it as a divine fingerprint the most readily was almost a divine fingerprint for your father as much as it was for you. You were very young and involved in an accident with a car. Tell me about what that meant for your dad and kind of how it happened.
When I was 2, my dad prayed this just real type A prayer. If you knew him, you would just nod right now and say, oh yeah, that tracks. He had grown up going to church, but did not have a lot of emotional kind of investment there. It had become something, going to church and even just considering God had become something that he checked off of a box, but he was sick of it. He was sick of the box checking. And so he prayed this prayer. No one knew about it at the time, but he said, if you're real, God, I want you to show me. And if not, I'm out of here. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to just jump through a hoop because, my small town growing up culture told me I had to. And 2 weeks later, I was in the backyard. I was 2 at the time. My dad came home for lunch, and I left the backyard. My parents didn't see me scoot out there. And then they heard my neighbor screaming, and she had backed up her car and run over me. So the tire went over my head. I had a bilateral skull fracture, which is not a great thing for a 2-year-old to have, or anybody. And the doctors were not very hopeful. I mean, there are all sorts of things that can happen. Most of them very serious, debilitating, paralyzing, or death. And so my dad went from kind of shaking his fist at heaven to begging. And he called everyone he'd known ever and said, will you please pray for my little girl? And just as we were just saying, God, I think, is so gracious in the way that he plants our native heart language and then he speaks it. So to another person, maybe a contemplative moment with a candle would have answered my dad's question. But for my dad's personality, he needed something big and loud and intrusive that stopped his life and his plan on its tracks. And God answered that prayer. And in 5 days, I was out of the hospital. I didn't even have children's Tylenol. The neurologist in our follow-up appointment, my mom says he just kind of sat with his hands open and kept shaking his head while I know that's hard for you to believe, but even at 2, I had a couple words. And so I was, kind of toddling around his office, chattering. And he just kind of shook his head and said, I cannot explain this. I have no medical explanation for this. And so, I've lived long enough now that I've seen many, many desperate prayers of parents not answered like that. So I tell this story with tenderness and with a complete bowing of my knee, knowing that there are lots of cries of my heart that have not had that quick of an answer. But what I do know is that even underneath the nose, God has shown himself over and over to be so good. Good to the good marrow of our bones good. And I can trust him with his answer. That particular answer, you're exactly right. That wasn't just a fingerprint on my dad's life. That was like a slap upside the head. He never got over it. It was a complete 180 for him in terms of what he pursues and what he has pursued in the last 45 years. He's absolutely wholeheartedly devoted to loving God and serving him. So he responded to that fingerprint, I would say, in a fairly definitive way and has raised his children out of that moment.
That's one of those stories, and the prayer is such an important part of the story. I mean, it could have happened and made an impact anyway, but sometimes we have to be careful what we pray for because
that's the truth.
You don't know exactly how God's going to handle that. And
you better believe it. Pray with caution.
Yeah. Well, by the time this episode airs, listeners who have gone through the whole series will have heard another story where a prayer wasn't answered. And this was, just kind of give the quick 30, 45-second version, was a college student, the daughter of my friend who was on the podcast with me, and she had this awful debilitating disease that basically burns you from the inside out. It was a 4-year process of praying for healing, and unfortunately or for God's purposes, I guess is a better way of saying this, the whole disease left her daughter blind. And after all of these years of praying for healing, the daughter herself basically said, I think God can use me more as a blind person.
Wow.
Which is kind of beyond my ability to understand, but she had prayed, the daughter had as a kid, to be a missionary to an underserved group. And the disabled essentially are one of the largest, if not the largest, underserved groups from the church's perspective.
That's true.
So she now founded an organization and spends her life working for those groups and all of these other people that are are disabled, and it's a beautiful way of God didn't answer the prayer in the way that they originally wanted, but he answered it still in a very beautiful way that still showed evidence of him and evidence of his love for us and his
Wow.
grace for us in a really hard way in that case.
Wow. That she would say yes to that plan, to plan B, C, D, E. That shows a lot about who she is and also her level of trust in a good God. Because I think a lot of the questions we ask eventually circle to that. I know lots of folks do wonder, is God there, right? Does God exist? But I think the twin question of that, and maybe the even more dangerous one, is God good? Does he look at my life with good purposes and with good intentions? And I think if you test him on that and ask open, honest questions of him, he will answer that. You better hold on to your seat, because the answer might be in a way that you did not anticipate. But I do believe that. I believe I've seen that over and over in my life, the goodness of God. And I absolutely plant my flag there, not because of me, but because I've just seen him bear that out over and over.
Absolutely. I think most of my stories would lead to that as well, just in the sense of how every trial, especially every major trial that I've gone through in my life, led to something else that was a positive in the long run that wouldn't have happened had I not dealt with the trial to begin with. And
Right.
we've talked about trust, and I don't think I would have the level of trust that I have in God now and in his goodness if I hadn't had to go through the valleys to come back out the other side.
That's
You know,
true.
we as humans love this idea of living a comfortable life, and I mean, even after going through everything, it's hard to say, well, I don't want comfort. But God never, there's not a lot of talk about comfort in the Bible.
No.
It's about, walking on the water, and challenging yourself and challenging your faith, and how do you grow with God and how do you trust him more. And none of that happens in the periods of comfort.
Nope.
Those are just, God calls that rest, between
Yeah.
all the other parts
Right.
of life,
Take a
really.
deep breath before the next cycle. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Let's go a little lighter for the next question. You really use humor as a tool in your books, and you, I think, help me to use humor more effectively in my own writing as well. Why is that so important in writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction?
Oh, I think it's a ninja move. And it's funny because for most of my writing, for a lot of the beginning of my writing life, I thought that humor was like the on-ramp to actual writing. So I kept getting these book contracts, writing these books, and I was like, that's great, but it's not my serious work yet. And it took me a while to realize actually humor allows for things that I personally struggle with getting to without it. So I actually wrote a book once that I went straight to the deeper stuff and the kind of the heart-wrenching. It was a total disaster. We shopped it for 18 months. No one was picking it up. And I know now, with hindsight, I ended up rewriting that book, and it was a much, much better gig. And it did well, thanks be to God, because I wasn't forcing something that wasn't as natural to me. So humor does come fairly naturally to me, and I've come to hold it as not just like the pretend stuff before we get to the good stuff. I think it enables the good stuff. So if you've noticed when you're in a room with people and you laugh together, there's something that happens with you that now you feel like you're in this together. It's a funny thing. It's a really funny thing that something that simple would create bonds and kind of this web, but it happens on the page too. If you've laughed with the author, I don't understand the math here, not sure about why this is true, but you trust her a little bit, or you trust him a little bit. Maybe because humor is not highfalutin. You can't laugh daintily. If you're laughing for real, you might snort, and you probably don't look super elegant. And so, and it gets to something underneath whatever posture we have. And so I've seen our mutual friend Bob Goff do this as a total master, using humor. The laughter dies down, and then he hits you with the zinger, where you have to think, oh man, now I have to think about the real thing, but I'll do it because we've built this kind of level of trust together. So my favorite books are ones that make me laugh and cry.
That makes a lot of sense. It's maybe laughter is kind of a universal language, if you will, of,
Yeah.
and different things make different people laugh, and you connect with different authors and comedians and everybody in that way. But it is a beautiful way to lead into some of those other things. So since we mentioned Bob, our mutual friend, you are a writing coach with him. How did you get into coaching? Is that something you ever thought you would do?
Oh, heavens. I didn't, was this a job when we were growing up? I don't think so. I mean, I also have 2 podcasts. What's that? That's not even a word my grandparents knew. So we just made that up, Andy. I made up this career with the help of folks who were doing cool things. Bob and I had known each other for a while, and we'd worked in other kind of writing things together. He had a Facebook writing course, and I helped with that. And then the world shut down. And I wasn't really a huge fan of 2020 in general, but one beautiful thing that came out of that was this new kind of a reimagined idea of work. And we were suddenly not gathering. I think if COVID hadn't happened, I don't think that we would have known that people are so good at having cameras and mics and are able to
True.
just connect through a monitor. I mean, what did we do? Skype? Who Skyped? Not many times did I Skype. So that out of that era, Bob and I kind of started conspiring and talking about all the folks that we were meeting that wanted to write books, but they just couldn't figure out how to get from A to Z. And we'd done it ourselves a few times. And so it's been such a joy for me because most of writing is so alone. And so, you can do it that way. I did it that way. But man, what I wouldn't have loved to have somebody on the other side saying, this paragraph's a little clunky, but I think I know how we can fix it. Or this story is, or this chapter is, or this idea of your whole book. Let's figure out how to really make it in service of the reader. So it's super fun for me. I used to be a high school teacher. I was a high school Spanish and ESL teacher. And so the teaching piece or coaching piece makes a lot of sense to me. It's just total joy to have people come in and say, I've got this idea. I'm not sure if it's going to work, and then help kind of chip the raw edges off to make it into something that really helps people on the other side of the page.
And I think it's really been a blessing, I know for me, but I suspect for all the different people that have gone to the workshops and gone through the coaching program. I don't know that I would have thought about writing my own book if I hadn't seen the advertisements and Instagram posts and that kind of thing over time. Certainly not as quickly. It feels like another fingerprint in the sense that God clearly knew I was going to write this book from before I was even born, let alone more recently. And I didn't really think about it until more recently. And then I knew that Bob had a class, and it's like, well, if I ever was going to write it, at least I know that there's help, because I don't really have a reason to think that I have a 60,000 page book in me. That just seems like such a daunting project.
60,000 word, just for the listeners, it's not 60,000 pages. You just said 60,000 pages. And that would be hard for people to take on if you're not a Russian novelist in the 1800s. So
I'm really glad I didn't write 60,000 pages. Let's try words.
I would have thrown it across the room. You never would have gone past me with that.
I would never have gotten past myself if I would have. I mean, I can't imagine how boring most of those pages would have been if I had to write that many of them. So
it's a lot of pages. I don't recommend it.
It's still a lot of words, let alone a lot of pages. I'm used to my students writing 350 word. Let's make sure I get the word right. Essays, not 60,000 words. And
no.
And it's amazing how little you actually still say in 60,000 words. All of the things that I cut out that I thought, oh, this will be in there, there, that weren't really that great when it came down to it, or I had better words. It's more, if you're listening to this and thinking maybe I should participate in this, you should. It's not, especially when you have wonderful help, it's not as hard as I expected it to be. I'm much more nervous and scared about publishing it and marketing it than I think I was about actually writing it. I'm a planner, and I think you figured that out pretty quickly in the process. Talk a little bit for us about, we've got people who are planners, and then you've got someone like Bob who's totally the opposite. Let's go on an adventure with God. Where do you fit in that dichotomy, if you will? And do you think God has a preference? Maybe I'll ask it that way.
I don't think he has a preference, as long as our posture is one of trust. So the planners get in trouble because we hold too tightly to our calendars and ask God to fit in. The pantsers, as we would call them, fly by the seat of your pants, get in trouble because the only thing, maybe, or the highest thing on the list is the adventure and not the sitting, not the waiting, not the hearing the still small voice, maybe more a confetti cannon. So we both have our picadillos. I think I probably tend more towards planning, but I grew up with a lot of adventure, so that's a comfortable space for me too. I don't know, the longer I grow into walking with Jesus, I realize how much I need to say over and over, okay, you have my yes. You have my yes. Today, it's all you. This hour, all you. Because I very quickly seem to want to take that back and say, but also I have these things to do. And then you're in charge. So does seem to be a dance of sorts, which he knows, right? I mean, I've been thinking about Peter lately. We're in Lent and heading towards Holy Week when we're recording this. And, Peter of all people could have had a better memory. He walks on water, for Pete's sake. He's seen Jesus feed thousands and thousands and thousands of people with scraps. And all it takes is a servant girl around the fire to say, weren't you with that guy? And he cusses and says, no, and runs away. I mean, we're not reliable with our memories. That's probably why Jesus or God says so often in the Bible, remember. So I have to remember every single morning my time with the Lord. I'm like, yeah, okay, so here we are again. Here's some problems again. I'm still thinking I'm in charge again. And his gracious response is always, I can feel in my spirit. He's like, I got it. I'm still in here with you, right? In fact, my way is better. So sometimes I'm better than others at agreeing with that. But I think he loves plotters and pantsers because he made us to be that, both of them. And so the question is, how readily do we unclench our hands and say, take the raw material, God, you write the best stories, even with my life.
I found that most of my plans either don't work or don't ever happen. And so
Right.
I think that's been his way for me of teaching me how to just to let go of some of those plans at times, or to hold them again, kind of like you said, with an open hand, realizing that if there's a better option that's clearly from God, something from him, that I'm open to changing course and changing direction. It's been a definite growth opportunity because I was the planner, to a T in terms of natural inclination. So
Yeah.
let me finish with one more question for you about grace. What's one way for the listener that we can give away grace in our lives?
Oh, great question. I would recommend paying close attention to the people in your circle. So all of them need an unmerited, unearned kindness. They all need it. We're living in a time where there's just a lot of division and a lot of rancor and a lot of dissension. If you kind of have to look at the news or social media with one eyeball open, like, oh man, now what? And folks are loud. Everybody's loud about all the things they feel. What a countercultural response we would have if we would just say, gosh, that sounds hard, or I can see how you feel that way. How can I step into this and give you unearned, maybe even unasked for mercy or grace, love or kindness? I mean, that's the way of Jesus, right? That was his mojo. Just every place he entered, grace led into the room and followed him on the way out. So for the people in your life, and this could be someone in your house, someone at your work, someone in the carpool lane, the person standing under the 10 limit sign at the grocery store, and she has 45 things, not 10. All those folks need a little grace. So we get to decide this way more often than we think. I don't think it's AP level. I think we actually have a lot of options in our day. And I think sometimes I get confused with, like, now is the time I give grace. Now that I'm working at the soup kitchen, or I'm packing meals, or I'm donating things, like, this is my grace time. That's the obvious grace time. The less obvious, more painful, but probably what has more legs is before 7, before you've had your coffee. Or at the dinner table when you've just kind of spent and you know somebody needs a little extra love. Or at work, at the coffee or at the water dispenser at work in the office, where really you could just walk on by. Or you could say, no, really, how are you? it's amazing how quickly the extension of grace can happen. We make it more complicated. It's actually, those opportunities are absolutely everywhere.
I think you said that beautifully. The only thing I think I would add to that is, at least in my own experience, is when we actually remember to give grace, then we're real quick to pat ourselves on the back and go, "Hey, I did it."
Check.
Which, I mean, I guess it's not the worst thing to notice that you made the better decision and all of that, but I think we need to recognize that the source of that grace is still coming from God.
Oh, yeah.
Not from our own amazing selves.
No, we've got about 2 nice things in us a day. That's about it. Well, anything extra is not from you anyway, sister, brother.
Maybe 1 extra on a Friday or a Saturday,
Right.
maybe one fewer on Monday.
Holidays.
Right? It evens out somewhere along there. So, well, Kim, thank you for joining us today on the Divine Fingerprints podcast. We've enjoyed the conversation, and I thank you again for all that you've contributed to the book as well. And listeners, we thank you for being with us again today, and hope you will join us next time. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks so much for having me. What a joy.